My name is Julie Hall, and I am on the board of Conscious Capitalism. And I am so honored and thrilled today to have my dear friend Donna Hicks here to talk about the importance of dignity. Just a quick housekeeping note about Conscious Capitalism. If you're not familiar, and probably most of you are since you got the email from the organization, our purpose is to build a movement of business leaders that are improving the practice and the perception of capitalism to elevate humanity so that billions of people can flourish, lead lives infused with passion, purpose, love, and creativity. And dignity is such an important part of that. So that's why we're just thrilled. I'm thrilled to have Donna here today to talk about dignity. Donna, I was trying to think when we met, and I know that it was pre-COVID, right? So yeah. I think your second book, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, had just come out.
Yeah.
And I think the way I'd love to kick it off is actually to officially introduce you by reading your biography, because your biography is so impressive. And I know many people are hugely interested in hearing about how you've used dignity as a ballast for conflict resolution in one of the most conflict-ridden places on the planet. And we're going to talk about that a little later. So I'm going to put on my readers so I can read your bio with the great respect and dignity it deserves. Dr. Donna Hicks is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. Dr. Hicks was deputy director of the program on international conflict analysis and resolution at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard. She worked extensively on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and as a member of the third party in numerous unofficial diplomatic efforts. In addition to her work in the Middle East, Dr. Hicks founded and co-directed a 10-year project in Sri Lanka. She's also worked on the conflicts in Northern Ireland and Colombia, and Northern Ireland and Colombia, and conducted several U.S.-Cuba dialogues. She is the vice president of Pacis, an Italian non-governmental organization based in Rome, currently involved in dignity restoration. She has co-facilitated encounters between victims and perpetrators in the Northern Irish conflict with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The encounters were made into 3 television programs, Facing the Truth, which were aired throughout the United Kingdom and BBC World. Dr. Hicks has taught courses in conflict resolution at Harvard, Clark, and Columbia universities, and conducts trainings and educational seminars in the U.S. and abroad on the role that dignity plays in healing and reconciling relationships and conflict, as well as dignity leadership training. She consults to corporations, schools, churches, and non-governmental organizations, and is the author of the book, your first book, Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, published in 2011 by Yale University Press. I met Dr. Hicks with her second book, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, that came out in 2018 before COVID. So, Donna, welcome, my dear friend. It is such a blessing to have you here. I know that everyone is really excited to hear about what you've learned. I personally have always been fascinated by the work you've done in dignity that really draws on your experience from biology, psychology, neuroscience. So let's kick this off. Tell me what dignity is.
Well, lots of people, first of all, before I answer that, just thank you, Julie and Melanie and everyone who is here with us. I know you're all very busy, especially at lunchtime. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to have a conversation about this important issue. I mean, I think dignity is one of the most important characteristics and aspects of the human experience. And as much as I think it is that big, one of my students once said to me, Donna, dignity is so big, I can't even see the edges of it. And she was right. It is so big. It plays such a central role in our lives. And yet when you ask people, well, what do you think about dignity? What they say, oh, it's something important, it's important, but what is it? And they say, well, I don't know, respect. People always say it's respect.
Right.
And in a minute, I'm going to tell you why I don't think it is the same as respect. They're related, but that's not the same. And so in my quest to figure out how to make this concept of dignity more accessible to people, I decided that I had to write about it in a way that simplified something very, very complex in the human experience. And simplified because when we feel that we're not being treated with dignity, it sets off all kinds of, biological responses inside us. Our brain is ready to fight. We get humiliated. We get, we feel, like we're ready for action. And it's usually not very nice action. And usually when somebody violates our dignity, we want to strike back and we want to return the harm. So those big emotional reactions that take place when we feel we've had our dignity assaulted is the reason why I made this definition so simple, Julie. I made it really simple because I wanted people to get it, and I wanted even young kids to get it. Because I also am very keen on getting all of this stuff in schools, which it is. I'll tell you more about that later. That's the good news. It's in the schools now. But the simple definition is that our dignity is our inherent inborn value. We come into the world with value and worth. And we also come into the world with one other aspect of that dignity, and that is we come into the world vulnerable to having that dignity injured. Just like our physical bodies are vulnerable to injury, so is our dignity. And I can say more about that too, Julie, in a minute. But when I'm doing this in person and I'm using my slides, I usually at this point have a beautiful slide of two babies, and I say to the audience, hey, look at these precious little human beings. They're newborns. Look at these precious newborns. Would you ever in a million years say that they don't have inborn value and worth? And so everybody kind of, gets into that feeling of, oh yeah, of course, human life is precious. Human life is valuable. And in fact, I think we would say that it's invaluable. Mm-hmm. And when you see those little newborns, you say, oh my gosh, they're priceless. They're irreplaceable. And so, I sort of want to make an emotional appeal with those photographs, because I want people to feel that preciousness. And because I say after they agree, yeah, we have value and worth. Of course. I want to say, but you know what? We don't lose that preciousness. We are all still invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable. But something went wrong somewhere, Julie?
Right.
Something went wrong where we forgot or something. Something happened. Oh, and so I was telling these teachers this about, the invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable characteristics of these babies. And I say, well, what happened? What happened? And one middle school teacher said, I'll tell you what happened. Adolescence is what happened.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that's my simple definition, Julie.
It's a great definition, and I think that the desire for dignity it's universal, right? And it's also extraordinarily powerful. You said a word that I wanted to explore a little bit, and your book actually sits on my bookshelf next to Brené Brown's book on vulnerability.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about, what happens when dignity is violated. And the most important, I love your 10 elements of dignity, which Melanie, thank you for putting that in the chat. But talk a little bit about, the interconnection that cleave between vulnerability and dignity and how the two interact and are related.
Yeah, I added that word to my simple definition, value and vulnerability with equal measure, because what I've learned, and I knew nothing about this until I started researching this, And, I started researching it maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. But what I learned was in studying social neuroscience, because someone gave me a tip and said, look, there are some social neuroscientists out at UCLA who are doing really important work about emotional responses and about what happens to us as humans in our brains when, we're mistreated. And I said, oh, wow, that's great. So I looked into this research and I found that what they were doing was what the social neuroscientists are interested in is the functions of the brain and how that drives our behavior. And so what they wanted to do was to put people in these brain scans, these long tubes, and then they had a screen up above them where they would flash different scenarios, social interactions. And what they first did was they wanted to see what happened when someone had an injury, when someone was physically injured. And then they watched for what part of the brain was illuminated when the subjects in this experiment watched this one episode where they had a physical injury. Well, what they found was that the part of the brain that got activated in even just viewing a physical injury was the ancient brain pain center. It's where we experience all pain, all emotions. It's called the amygdala. It's a part of it's called one of the oldest parts of our brain.
The reptilian brain, I've heard it.
It is. Yeah. It definitely is. And so what this told me was that so then they flashed this scenario where someone had their dignity violated by another person. And lo and behold, the same area of the brain was activated when people felt they had an assault to their dignity or an injury to their dignity, when someone mistreated them, when someone embarrassed them, when someone, discriminated against them or treated them unfairly. These reactions in the brain are the same. So essentially what that means is the brain doesn't know the difference between a physical wound and when somebody wounds their dignity. Right. So I had to add that vulnerability piece there. Right. Because this isn't just something, I went into the corporate world for the first time and I was meeting with this executive leadership team, really wonderful people. I was meeting with them and they said, at one point, oh, Donna, this is really touchy-feely, very nice. You want us to all treat each other well. Oh, that's good. But we really need some evidence that what you're saying is there's really something there. And I said, okay, you want evidence? I'll give you evidence. And I showed them a couple of slides about all this neuroscience, and their jaw dropped. Like, what? You mean we might be harming our people and not even knowing it because we're violating their dignity? And we didn't even know what that meant until you got here, Right. And so it was a switch that turned for them, Julie. It was like, oh gosh, we do have to pay attention to this then. Yes. And I said, of course we do, because you would never allow people to go around your workplace beating each other up and physically injuring people. You would never allow that. But right. we have to have that same conviction and commitment to not violating people's dignity, because at the end of the day, it's the same thing inside the person.
Exactly. And you're right. Dignity it's primal, right? The need for dignity is a primal need. In your first book, Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, which everyone should go to their local bookstore and buy, it's a wonderful sort of primer on dignity. You talk about, well, first of all, you say exactly what you just said, that most people know little about dignity, really. My sons went to Montessori school up until age 12. And I have to say, when I look back on that, that was one of the biggest blessings, because dignity is a ballast in all of their learnings, even from the peace rose. If there's conflict, they have to give the other person a peace rose and talk about it. Very, very different from what you see elsewhere. But most people, as you said, don't really understand, or they know very little about dignity. And in your first book, you talk about the three components of dignity, the three elements. What you need to know, what you need to do, and to create a culture. Could you speak a little bit about those three elements?
Yeah, well, what you need to know is, number one, there are so many facts, let's put it that way. So there's such a knowledge base about dignity that I put together in those two books. And, if you're going to be organized as a company or you're in a workplace, these issues emerge all the time. It's just that, we tend to not think about the impact or anything. But the information that I share in those two books, Julie, is all about, in having researched this is what people experience. This is what we have to do. And so what I ended up doing was making very concrete, because again, simplify was my motto in writing these books. I wanted people to know what it looked like to treat each other with dignity. And not only the knowledge base, which is, the first know, what you have to know, and then, but also, how do you put this into practice? What do we do? How do we integrate this into a lifestyle, not just a tool that we're going to pull off the shelf? This is a way of life that I'm proposing here. And, creating the culture just means that you've got a set of norms, a set of policies that are dignity honoring. And, using these 10 elements, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute, using those 10 elements of dignity, it will help you understand what it looks like on a day-to-day basis to honor somebody's dignity, to have your dignity honored. And frankly, we're talking about the workplace a lot, but this stuff, as I said, this is it's kind of a evolutionary shift in your thinking once you get this knowledge, because it affects every single relationship that you have. It's not just your work relationships, it's your partners, it's your intimate family, it's your friends, your community, your, all the way up to international relations, which is where I started with this stuff.
Right.
So it's a commitment to recognizing you mentioned just a minute ago, the universality of this. This is about what it means to be human.
Yeah.
This is as fundamental as that. And the good thing about that, Julie, is that it's something that we can appeal to when things go sideways, when things go crazy in a relationship. We forget, that's one of the first things we forget. We forget that, oh my gosh, we are all vulnerable human beings. It matters when we mistreat each other. It affects our relationships, because what's really primal about the human experience is our need for connection with other people. We don't exist. We don't do very well on our own. We've got since COVID, we have an epidemic of loneliness here. I've just heard someone give a talk on loneliness. It's so sad. So we have to learn how to connect, how to make those, wonderful moments of recognition that, yeah, I see you, I see you, or I hear you, or I know that your humanity is wrapped up in mine. But boy, those simple truths, Julie, they go right out the window when conflict starts knocking at your door.
And conflict, I think comes from a place of fear, right? Also a primal emotion that resides in the reptilian brain, right? So when you think about fear and you think about conflict, because that really is when you get angry, and I've learned this through a lot of therapy, when you get angry, that is your bodyguard fear. It's really your fear is coming out. So understanding that you don't need to be fearful. Let's just walk through it. Again, it's the ego and it's vulnerability. You talked about, and I can't remember which book it was in, but you talked about taking a vulnerability inventory. What is that? Can you tell us
Mm.
how to do that and its importance in understanding the conflict resolution process?
Well, I think what we're going to have to do the 10 elements first, because the inventory
Okay,
is based on the 10 elements.
excellent, good.
Here
Okay.
she is. Melanie's done it. Okay. So what I did was, as I told you, I was so interested in making this practical for people so that they could see it, they could feel it, they could understand it. And I'm not talking about adults, I'm talking about kids as well. Just
Right.
adults. I'm certainly talking about adults, but I wanted kids to understand this. So I decided what I wanted to do was to interview people from all over the world. And I wanted to have them tell me about a time when they felt their dignity had been violated and injured. And I can tell you that there were so many stories that I had to stop people like, okay, all right, this is enough. This is enough. But I interviewed people from Asia, from Africa, from North America, South America, Europe, Middle East. I mean, you name it. I interviewed people, and what I found was that there were these 10 ways in which people felt their dignity was violated, and 10 ways, I mean, and the flip side of that was how they would have wanted to be treated. And so these 10 patterns emerged, and I ended up calling them the 10 elements of dignity. And the first one was people wanted their identity accepted, no matter who they were, no matter their race or their religion or their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their physical capabilities. People wanted to be thought of as being equal in dignity, no matter what their identity was. So people wanted their identity accepted. They wanted recognition. You know, in the workplace, this looks like, gee, you know, you did a really nice job. Thank you, Julie, for, you know, doing such a great job on that project. Well done. People want that kind of recognition from others, especially from their bosses. And acknowledgement is a really deep one, actually. You know, when I worked with Archbishop Tutu, I was, you know, just in awe of him every single minute of the time that we spent together. And I, you know, remember getting to know him, and I asked him this question. I said, Arch, he wanted us to call him Arch. I said, what, you know, you're such a champion of reconciliation. You have brought people together under the most extraordinary circumstances in South Africa. You know, what do you think it takes to put the past to rest? I asked him. And he said, well, Donna, and I quote, he said, when people have been roughed up, they need acknowledgement for the suffering they've endured. They need acknowledgement for the suffering they've endured. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so simple, but deep at the same time. You know, when people are injured, especially when their dignity is injured, we need to tell them, we need to go to them and say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It should have never happened to anybody. Because what ends up happening is people feel bad, like there's something wrong with them if someone mistreats them. And I say, look, you're not bad. Something bad happened to you.
Yes.
That's the difference. And when they can make that switch, when they hear somebody say, you're not bad, something bad happened to you, that externalizes the problem, and then you can work with it, you know? So acknowledgement is huge. Inclusion, well, we all know about inclusion. People want a sense of belonging. We have DEI workshops all over the country and world. So we know that one. Safety is interesting. One, it's not just physical safety, but psychological safety as well. And in a minute, I'll say more about that. But fairness, independence, people don't like to be micromanaged. People want to be understood. They hate being judged when they feel like it was unfairly, you know, that they're being judged unfairly. People want to be given the benefit of the doubt. And finally, accountability. People, when they've had their dignity violated, want an apology. And it's not just, oh, I'm sorry, but it's more like, I'm sorry, and no buts, and I'm going to try really hard not to do that again. That's what accountability is. It means to the people I interviewed. So I want to say one thing. When I first went into the corporate world back in the early 2000s, I showed the employees in this big corporation, I showed them these 10 elements. And I said, which one of these elements of dignity do you think is violated most in your workspace, in your workplace? And, I'm thinking, oh, it had something to do with being discriminated against or not treated fairly, or maybe not getting the recognition you deserve. But 80%, I was wrong. 80% of the respondents said that safety was the element that was most often violated. And I said, safety, I would have never guessed that. I'd say, tell me more. And what they would say over and over again is that they didn't feel safe to speak up when their boss mistreated them. Or when somebody mistreated, they felt, because, we're conflict avoidant, we humans. That's another aspect of what it means to be human. We don't like confronting people who have hurt us. So, these 10 elements of dignity, I think they should be thought of as the rules of engagement when you're with other people. These are the rules. This is what we want. These are the expectations we have of how we want to be treated and how we would want to treat other people. Right. And the thing about this, Julie, is that when people feel that they're treated this way, one amazing thing happens. There's all kinds of research in the business management field that shows that when people feel that they are being treated well, that they are much more willing to give discretionary energy, productivity increases, the engagement increases, employee engagement, job retention. People don't want to leave. If they're if they're working in an environment where the culture is that we want to bring out the best in everybody, we want to treat each other well, nobody wants to leave. And lo and behold, the other significant finding, that loyalty, of course, increases. The other significant finding was profits increase. So, yes, it's the right thing to do to treat people this way, and it also increases profits. So to me, this is a no-brainer. This is if you want to create trust, this is how you do it. Trust emerges when people feel they're being treated well. And by the way, if you want to break trust, all you have to do is violate one of these, and the trust goes out the window too.
I think this is so valuable. And again, we put this, Melanie, thank you for putting it in the chat so people can print it out or save it and share with their organizations. I think, Donna, we've talked about this before, in a changing work environment, now it's so important that the culture of an organization really embodies and encourages this. But even more important now that everyone is remote for the most part, right? And it's so hard to, how would you bring this to life in a remote Zoom world that we're living in now?
Well, I don't think that there's any guarantee that if we're on Zoom that these things won't happen. They do. But people are very quiet. They would never say anything, especially when you're on a group in a meeting like this one. Nobody wants to speak up like that and say, oh, gee, I know what you mean. My boss just mistreated me and so on. But I think it's hard. It's really hard to be isolated in your home. Some people love remote work, I'm a people person. I like being out there in the world, but not everybody does. And that's fine. That's fine. As long as you just follow these same rules of engagement, it works beautifully, actually. And then, if something does emerge, what I have counseled people is that if something does happen and you don't feel like you want to address it in the group meeting, make sure you give that person a call, go and have coffee with them, whatever it takes. But, let this be a signal, because conflict is really, when conflict arises like that around some kind of a violation of these elements, it just means that there's something in the relationship that needs to change.
Right.
Some ways that we're treating each other that, because in culture, one of the problems with culture is that there are these implicit norms that say, oh, it's okay to treat people this way. We're not going to do anything about it. But once you know this, I say once you know, you're responsible. But the toxic element of any workplace is where these sorts of behaviors go unaddressed, and not even just unaddressed, but if your leadership team models this behavior, oh man, you're in trouble. You're in trouble, because people pay attention to the way the leadership is behaving. This is as simple as ABC, but everybody's watching the leadership. And if the leadership can embody these elements and treat people this way, not only interpersonally, but you mentioned you mentioned culture. And the other thing is the leadership has to create policy that affects everybody. It's not just one-on-one. What are the policies that are being generated by the executive leadership team? What are those policies? Are they dignity honoring policies? And if they're not, we have to do something about it. So it's those two levels. One is the interpersonal knowledge and awareness of these things, but also how do we make this a way of life in our culture?
And what are some ways that organizations can make sure they're measuring it? Is there a dignity index that you can post and score as you're going along? How do you see organizations doing that?
Yeah, and now I just remembered that you asked about a vulnerability inventory.
Yes.
So let's go back to that, and then I'll answer this other question, because it was such a great question. The vulnerability inventory is taking a look. Let's go back. Melanie, can we put that back up again? Sorry. Where is she?
Yeah, no problem. 1 second.
Well, the vulnerability inventory is just looking at those 10 elements of dignity and reflecting on your life in the past, especially as young kids, because so many of these dignity violations occur early in our lives, and they have an imprint on our brain, on our hypothalamus, because that's what gets or hippocampus. And that's where all of these frozen memories are as kids. So as young people, I'd say, okay, take a look at these 10 elements of dignity. Was your identity accepted? Did you ever get discriminated against because of something about your identity? Or were you treated as unfairly, or treated as inferior, whatever, about your identity? What about recognition? Did you get that recognition early on from your parents, from your teachers, from your friends? And then you just go down that list. Gee, how often did I have an injury to my dignity and basically had to just suck it up? I didn't get the kind of acknowledgement that I needed especially as a young kid. And so you go and, you through your life with these dignity violations unacknowledged and stockpiled inside your brain. Inclusion, you ask yourself, did I feel like I belonged throughout anyway, you go through every one of them. Did I feel safe? Physically and psychologically safe, because safety also includes feeling like you could be your authentic self. And not have to cover some aspect of yourself up, feeling incompetent or feeling one way or the other. Fairness, was I always treated fairly? And so you just go down this list of 10 things, and you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how did I do as a young person? Because what happens is, if you've got problems in your relationships, in the current and in your adult life, it's often you can trace it back to one of these elements of dignity that wasn't honored for you as a young person or as a young adult. So these things, I guess the main point here, Julie, is that these things stick in our brains when we're not being treated well, when treated as we're inferior or less than, or that we didn't matter. Those feelings stay inside us unless we get that kind of acknowledgement. And I'll tell you, one of the most powerful things I do with people when I do workshops, trainings, is we do acknowledgement exercises. And I can tell you there was one guy who sticks in my mind, whose story stuck in my mind when we did an acknowledgement exercise with him. He told the story about how when he was a little kid in school, he used to stutter, and his teacher used to make fun of him. And all the kids used to make fun of him. And this guy ended up becoming a very powerful military guy, an officer in the military. He was really a decorated soldier and everything. And when he told his story to our group, when we were doing the training, when he told his story and he got the acknowledgement that he needed from one of the participants in the workshop, the guy burst into tears.
Well, see? Yeah.
Yes, because that energy stays inside us, you see? And so this is why acknowledgement is so important, and we can do that for each other. We can do it for each other. Like, wow, what happened to you,
And accepting and asking people that, right? Identifying it. I do a lot of work in system 1 and system 2 thinking, subconscious and conscious thoughts and implicit, when you talk to people about implicit, I don't have any implicit reservoirs, but yes, you do. Every experience you have, every, trip you take, every conversation that you have with a human from when you're an infant on up is an experience that you draw on, even subconsciously. And I don't think people realize that, it's related to dignity. You just made me think of that famous quote by, I believe it's Maya Angelou or Madeleine Albright, one of the two, that people won't remember what you've said, but they'll remember how you've made them feel, right?
That's Maya Angelou.
Okay,
yes.
A beautiful one, isn't it?
That's one of my favorites, absolutely.
And that has dignity written all over it, right?
It's all about how you're being treated. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and everyone is entitled to that same element of human dignity, whether you're coming, for refuge from a different country, or you are, fighting for freedom somewhere. Everyone deserves that dignity. Before we jump to questions, because I know that some of our visitors will have some questions, I want to ask you about your work in the Middle East and some of the things that you've experienced and seen, and examples perhaps of how your work in dignity actually did help to bridge. And what would you recommend right now, given the state that we're in? I know that's a big question, right? It's tough.
Yeah, I will answer that briefly. It's such a horror. It's such a nightmare at all levels that it's hard as a third party, which is what I used to do. I would bring parties together for dialogue in the Middle East and many other places as well. And I think, in retrospect, looking back at all those years, I worked with my my mentor and Professor Herbert Kellman at Harvard. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he dedicated his life, his entire career, to try to bring peace to the Middle East. So having worked with him for 3 decades, that rubbed off on me, his passion for trying to find a peace in the Middle East and his total commitment. And I think right now, there isn't a heck of a lot that people like me, who are the third parties in these mediators trying to bring people together. It's just too soon right now. There is the rawness on both sides. On October 7th, when we saw that horrific. I mean, it's like you were watching those awful images come out of the Middle East. You're thinking, this can't be. This is like animal. This is animal behavior. This is not even. And then you hear about in defense of, trying to corner Hamas and everything. And then you hear about all these little kids in Palestine who are dying, and like 11,000 people died, and as a way to get to Hamas. I'm thinking there's something fundamentally wrong here. We need to elevate this issue and try to not find common ground. Honestly, I don't think it's common ground what we need in the Middle East. I think it's higher ground to bring this. Oh, it makes me want to cry.
I know.
Because, I've been working on this conflict and feeling the signs of hope for so many times during the past couple of decades. And my mentor, my guy, Herb Kelman, who was a Holocaust survivor, we were also, convinced that what we had to do, and this is what we can do right now, meaning all of us can do this, is to try to maintain a position of hopefulness, because they can't do it. They're hurting too badly there. Both sides are suffering way too much. They can't even envision hope as much as we can. So I think those of us who are working on these conflict, this unspeakable set of circumstances now, the way it's devolved into, we need to elevate it. We need to bring it up. We need to have conversations about the dignity of everyone involved in there, and to see if there was some way that we can hold that space open for future dialogues, because it's too chaotic now. We can't do it now, but to hold that space so that when the time is right, we'll be ready to intervene and to create some ideas for them to move this peace process forward. It's going to be complicated no matter what, Julie, but we have to hold that space for them.
Yes. And could you share when you had shared with me that you were asking Professor Hellman for guidance, and what he told you?
Yeah.
He's passed away, right? He passed away 2 years ago, and
yeah.
you asked him for guidance. What did he say to you?
Yeah.
What came to you?
Yeah, he died 2 years ago, and it was broke my heart, and because he was more like a father to me, in addition to being a mentor. So I had a very, very special relationship with him, and it still continues to this day, because as I told Julie earlier, that after October 7th happened, I went to the Mount Auburn Cemetery where he is buried. And I decided I was going to ask him, what should I do? Herb, what should I do? I'm in a crisis here, watching the crisis in the Middle East. I feel that sense of crisis. And of course, he didn't answer me right away, but I'm walking back to my car, and all of a sudden, this line, this phrase comes to me. And what came to me was, create space for hope to endure. That's the message he sent me. Create space for hope to endure.
Beautiful.
And that's what I've been doing, holding that space.
Right. And if we all hold that space for hope to endure in our interpersonal relationships and the encounters that we have, that, it's that let peace begin with me, right?
Yes.
I just love that, we talked a little bit about the word hope, and hope is such a powerful, powerful word. And dignity, I think, is probably held up by hope, or is hope held up by dignity? I don't know, but they are definitely supportive of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I have to think about that connection there, but I think there's certainly no dignity without hope,
Right.
Otherwise, we'd fall into despair.
Right.
And I think and seeing the dignity in ourselves and each other is what the basis, the foundation for that hope is, saying we can do better than this.
Right.
We can do better.
Yes, we can do better. And it's not just the conflict that we're seeing in the Middle East. We're seeing school board meetings devolve into people firing off obscenities. And as a globe, we are all at this very, challenging inflection point where change is happening so rapidly. What it means to be human is being questioned through artificial intelligence and these large language models. So it is really a time to, harken back to ancient wisdom and really looking at, what are those elements of being human that need to be honored and cherished and have space made for. I want to make sure, Melanie, I'm going to look at some questions. Oh my gosh, look at all of this. We've got a lot of questions.
Okay.
And we also have the essential elements of dignity download in here. So Mike Nolan, hi Mike, has a question. Can you provide any titles of the research or articles showing that if people are treated well, then profits increase?
Oh, I don't have it at the top of my head, Mike, but there's a guy at, there's something really interesting. There's a guy at Fordham University. His name is Professor Michael Pearson, P-I-R-S-O-N. He is a colleague. He contacted me years ago when the first book came out. It was like the summer of 2011. He contacted me because he was interested in trying to create a whole new business paradigm after the economic crisis in 2008, 2009. He, as a business ethicist, decided he wanted to figure out a better way to do business so that this catastrophe that we experienced back then wouldn't happen again. And so he created something called the Humanistic Management Network. You can look that up, Mike. And he has written extensively on the research that supports this notion that when people are treated well in the workplace, then all these things are going to happen. I mean, I can send Julie some of the research because it's in my second book, The Leading with Dignity. I quote a lot of Michael's stuff and his work with the Humanistic Management Network, and it's a global enterprise now. Because let me just say, what the shift in the thinking and the paradigm is that the idea is that the old paradigm, which is to increase shareholder profits, was what caused the first collapse back in the 08, 09. And so what they wanted to do was to put human dignity and concern for human dignity at the core of their objectives. It wasn't shareholder profits. It's how to create an environment where people feel cared for and their well-being is being looked after by the leadership team. Michael Pearson, he's written extensively, and he wrote actually a book. I think I have his book here somewhere. Well, anyway, I do have it here, but if you look him up, Mike, I think you'll be fascinated by what he's done with this Humanistic Management Network.
There's so many companies you hear about, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, like companies that really put caring for their team members as a part of, and treating them with dignity. Unfortunately, I mean, you and I have been doing this for a while. I was thrilled after I founded Communitas in 2018 that the Business Roundtable came out 4 months after we launched. And I still remember the day. It was August 19th, 2019. The Business Roundtable came out and said that shareholders were not the primacy anymore. It was stakeholders, right? And what does that mean? Unfortunately, in the past couple of years, we're now seeing this, terrible pendulum swing where that's being called woke capitalism, right? And being woke is not, considered politically correct by many. So we're sort of in this weird liminal space now where we do know that there's value and there's tremendous financial value in incorporating not only dignity, but respect, inclusion, all of those things. But it's a difficult business environment when markets are so strangled that people are focused on, I still have to make a return, right, for my investors. So it's a challenging time to be focusing on these things. As you mentioned, everybody's been doing diversity and inclusion workshops, but we're seeing, diversity leadership in organizations really being halved from where it was. And that is really sad to me. That's really sad, which is why the work that conscious capitalism does is so important, to make sure that critically important, especially as capitalism, evolves and changes. There's, my friend Ethan teaches reimagining capitalism at Harvard Business School. And I was very heartened to hear that this year was the first year he actually has hedge fund guys, and they're guys, hedge fund guys taking his class. It's not just the do-gooders, that are corporate social responsibility. They actually have people who are, really focused on making a profit, understanding how capitalism needs to change. And there's a huge dignity element when I think about Henry Ford, and right. I mean, it's when you look back on the turn of the last century and how humans were treated.
Terrible.
Looking at, giving people a living wage, all of the things that dignity through the ages. There's an idea for your next book, right? Dignity
through the ages. Yes. Yeah.
Let's see. I want to see if we have. There's Jim Feldkamp put the humanistic management book in the chat, so I saw that come through. Yeah. Any other questions? People can throw them in the chat. Donna, this has been so incredibly interesting, and that I just adore the work that you do. I have another question that I want to ask about. You had mentioned in the beginning of the conversation that people often confuse dignity with respect. What about dignity and empathy? Like, what's the relationship there? Is dignity empathy? Is dignity the outcome of empathy? What's the connection?
Well, first, let me just say why I think it's different from respect. And when I learned this working in the Middle East and in Asia and Africa, and when I was doing these dialogues, because the parties would always say, while pounding their fist on the table, we demand respect. And I would say to them, wait a minute, you can't demand respect. I said, maybe what you want to demand is to be treated with dignity. I think that's what you're really wanting to say, that you want to be treated as a human being. But I said, respect is a bridge too far. I said, I think respect has to be earned. Yes. So if I say I respect Julie, if I respect you, Julie, it's because I know you, I've seen what you've done and the contributions you've made. So respect does require you to do something extraordinary or out of the ordinary. And dignity, on the other hand, we all deserve to be treated with dignity. I mean, that's something we can do something about. We can't make people respect each other because that is an interaction that takes place between two people. Dignity is ours for the taking. And so that's the difference. And empathy, I studied evolutionary psychology and biology as a way to understand conflict and dignity. And what I came across this research, E.O. Wilson is one of the big proponents of this evolutionary biology. And he said that empathy is hardwired in us. Our desire to understand the feelings of others. So when the world is right, we humans can do a pretty good job of reading the feelings of others. We're pretty good at it when we're not all triggered and anxious and miserable, when we're not trying to get even with somebody. But empathy, he thinks, is part of our survival mechanisms. We think of survival as fight and flight and, kill the person and get rid. That's the negative part of, the survival instincts. He thinks that our desire and our capacity for empathy is what's going to get us through to the next stage of human evolution of our consciousness. Without empathy, we're not going to do any good. We're not going to be good at all in addressing these other survival instincts that we have that makes us want to fight and flee. So according to E.O. Wilson, he would say, treating each other with dignity is critically important. And part of that process is being able to connect with other people, to have that deep connection. And I think, without that connection and without empathy, I think because empathy is the first thing to go when we're in conflict with other people. Our capacity to just say, oh, yeah, I can understand that you feel that way. Yeah, I get that. So again, under normal conditions, we can do that. But boy, when we're ready to fight, empathy goes. But it's a big part of dignity, big part.
Yeah,
the whole chapter in my second book about empathy.
Yeah, and it's been a buzzword for the past couple of years too, for sure.
Yeah.
You hear about it quite a bit. We have another question in here. Donna Huskin, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Deborah Huskin, how do you mediate when both sides feel strongly that their dignity has not been respected? Ooh, that's a good one.
Well, I have a very unique approach to using the dignity model, what I call the dignity model. When somebody invites me to go in and do a mediation or a facilitation of dialogues between two parties, I don't start out with the negotiations. I start out with an education. Maybe even, let's say I have a week to do that. I would spend at the least the first 3 days doing a dignity education program with them. So what does that mean? I would like give them a Dignity 101 seminar where I'd ask them, I said, look, what we're going to do here is we're not going to be party A and party B. We're going to be students of dignity here for the first 3 days. That's what I want you to identify with. We are learning about dignity and the role it plays in creating conflict and the role it can play in resolving conflict. And so for the first, that's what I do. I educate them about the things that I have learned through all my research. And by the time, this is so interesting, it happens every time, but by the time we're done with the educational component, they have reconnected, their empathy has reconnected, Julie. It's interesting because the question follows from what we just talked about before, that because a lot of the work that I do in the educational part, where I'm telling them everything, we do lots of reenactments of dignity violations. And so we kind of humanize, the people. We humanize each other. And I worked on this for years, so this is very very orchestrated by me. I don't leave much to chance when it comes to the education piece because it's very delicate. It can be very, very delicate. But that's the whole idea, is to reestablish that platform of empathy so that you can see the dignity of each other.
And that is something that I think is lacking. We're so focused, especially from an HR perspective, that we do performance reviews and performance metrics. And there isn't a dignity element that is incorporated in many of these reviews that people have. I think that could be, again, there's another book idea for you for sure. Well, I think we had another question or a comment, but I wanted to be respectful of time because we're about 3 minutes over. Let's see, someone else mentioned the Gallup organization has done some research on the topic. And we did answer Deborah's question, I believe. Yes, she said thank you. She said thank you, which is what I am going to say now. Donna, this has been, thank you so much.
Hey, Julie, really Julie, yes, you're doing acrobatics. Are you?
I know. I don't know if you heard her or not, but my dog started barking, so I had to run
Oh,
over and
okay.
grab her. So I
Oh,
moved, yes, I moved the
that
around,
was so
moved it around.
funny.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I was
Oh my goodness.
impressed. I thought, whoa, this is something novel. This is new. Yeah.
I'm always on the go. I'm always on
Yeah.
the go. So thank you so much, Donna. This has been
You're welcome.
really, really informative. I think hugely timely. And thank you for all the work that you do because it's so necessary in our world for sure.
You're welcome, Julie. My
Thank
pleasure.
you. And have a wonderful Thanksgiving. We'll talk soon.
To everyone too. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Take
Oh,
care.
everyone loved it. Thanks, Donna. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.